Hi, I'm a photographer and this is Inside Motorsport. In this episode, I'll take you behind the scenes of Alpine hypercars pre-season tests, held in Monza on February 3rd and 4th. The French team chose the Temple of Speed to prepare for the 2025 WEC season. In addition to the two testing days, they used the main straight to shoot the photos used to present both the car and the driver lineup. Paul Chaten, Ferdinand Habsburg and Charles Milesi were confirmed as the official drivers of Car 35. While Jules Gounon, Frederick Makowiecki, and Mick Schumacher were assigned to car 36. On the third, only the 35 was running, with all the 6 official drivers taking turns at the wheel. On the fourth, both hypercars hit the track, with each driver working with their own. On the first day, the sky was clean and temperatures were around 12 degrees. On the second day, the weather was cloudier, so it was a bit colder. When I arrived at the circuit on the 3rd, around 11:20, the Alpine was on track, but I returned to the pits almost immediately. The wait to sit again was quite long. In fact, the car stayed in the garage for nearly an hour. During that time, I took position at the exit of the Ascari chicane. At around 12:15, the French team went back on track for a stint of about 6 laps. During that run, I captured my first shots of the day. This one, in particular, is one of my favorites from the 2 days of testings. I also like these ones, which I took from behind the car as it was already halfway down the straight leading to the Parabolica. The hypercar returned to the track about 10 minutes later for the final stint of the morning session, which was scheduled to end at 1 p.m. For this run, I moved to the entry of Ascari, where I took some shots of the Alpine under braking, along with a few panning shots as it went through the corner. Based on the helmet colors, the driver behind the wheel during the final hour of the morning appeared to be Frederick Makowiecki. He returned to the pits after just a few laps, concluding the first part of the test day. Track activity resumed around 2 p.m. However, the hypercar stopped after a short time because of a mechanical failure, which kept it in the pits for over an hour. With no 36 on track, no one ran during the 35's repair period. For this reason, I moved to the grandstand at the inside of the Parabolica exit, hoping to catch a glimpse of the pit lane activity from there. From that spot, I saw Mick Schumacher in his racing suit, talking with a member of the Alpine team. About 10 minutes later, the 35 returned to the track for a couple of laps, likely to check that everything was working properly after the mechanical issue. When it came back to the pits, I took a few shots of the car being received by the team's mechanics. Looking at the helmet colors, the driver behind the wheel for that short run was Mick Schumacher himself. Once it was clear that everything was working properly, the hypercar returned on track for a longer stint. During that, I took this photo through a very small gap I found on the footbridge that crosses over the track. A bit after, while I was walking along the grandstand at the exit of Ascari, 2 official drivers of Car 35 passed right by me, Paul Chaten and Ferdinand Habsburg. Since they were scheduled to drive anytime soon, they took the opportunity to go for a run around the circuit. I stopped them and we had a quick chat. They were the ones who gave me all the background information about these tests that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. At the end, I asked if I could have taken a photo of them. Here it is, and definitely it's a shot I will treasure forever. After that, they resumed their run, heading in the direction of Turn 1, along the service roads inside the circuit. As I was on my way there too, I crossed paths with them again as they were already heading back to the paddock. When I got to the grandstand, the Alpine was in action. While it was running, presumably still with Mick Schumacher at the wheel, I took some panning shots. At one point, the hypercar went straight at turn 1 and had to weave around the markers to get back on track. For the following stints, I moved to a more unusual spot. I climbed up the old Parabolica, which runs alongside the first chicane of the current layout, so I could get a much more interesting and closer perspective of the track compared to the grandstand, which was located before the corner. This is the result from there. Back in the grandstand, I lowered the shutter speed to as low as 1/8 to try and capture a more unique effect, while the Alpine completed its final laps in the fading light of the day. The French team kept running into dusk, which set in around 5:45. This last stint went on for about 10 minutes. Once it was over, the hypercar returned to the pits, bringing the first day of testing to an end. On the second day, I took many fewer photos of the car on track, because I wanted to explore if there were interesting spots around the Parabolica area. as it is one of the most interesting corners of the circuit. Unfortunately, the path to reach the outside of the parabolica was very long, and once I got there, I discovered that this was the only spot where I could point my camera at the track, and the view from there was blocked with fences. Moreover, the road running alongside the corner was much lower than the track, so it was nearly impossible to photograph the car. The best images I took that morning are these, showing a Marshal standing near the corner exit, watching the Alpine on track. The morning session ended early because of an incident involving the 36 at the parabolica. At one point I heard a lock-up, the sound of gravel being kicked up, and a thud against the barriers. It happened around 12:30, and since the car got stuck under the Tech Pro barriers, the recovery took quite a long time. From where I was, I still managed to capture a few details of the incident. I spotted some Monza truck workers fixing the barriers, and, through the gaps in the guardrail, parts of the crashed car being loaded onto a recovery vehicle. The truck then brought it back to the garage, while Alpine mechanics began repair work to get it back on track for part of the afternoon session. The marshal I had spoken to before told me that he hadn't recognized the driver, so I'd rule out Mick Schumacher among the three. In the afternoon, I started from the inside of the parabolica. I didn't particularly like this spot either, but from here I took the most particular photos of the test. I tried to eliminate the trees from the frame by using a very slow shutter speed, and this is the result. You can make out the silhouette of the car at the exit of the corner, surrounded by the hundreds of leaves and brancals between me and the track. At that moment, only the 35 was on track. The 36 came back on track after 4:30, when the sun was already starting to set. I photographed it for the first time at Ascari, when it was almost 5. Both cars were on track at that point, and this one I took of the 35 is another of my favorites from the test. After that, I moved to a nearby spot that offered a view of the entire straight between Ascari and Parabolica. At that time, the Alpines were attempting some push laps. As you can see from these photos, they were weaving to bring the tires up to the right temperature. I spent the final part of the session at the entrance of Ascari. An interesting detail you can notice in these photos is the hypercar's brake lights, which Alpine designed in the shape of the letter A from their logo. Unlike the previous day, the team didn't continue on track into dusk. The second and last day of testing came to an end at around 5:30. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next episode, which will focus on the shakedown of the 2025 V-Carb F1 car, which took place at Imola on February 19th.